Chapter 27, Spatial Distribution of Species and Ecosystems. Section 27.1, Geographic Range and Ecological Niche. So a geographical range can be defined as the spatial distribution of a species. Where does it exist on the Earth? And we have to be careful because some species actually don't exist on the surface of the Earth, but have the ability to exist within the atmosphere. Some species are cosmopolitan. Cosmopolitan means that they exist over large areas of the Earth's surface. Other species are endemic. Endemic means that they exist in just small, relatively small areas. Now, the geographic ranges of organisms are not constant over time. They shift, they expand, and they contract. And this is basically caused by the fact that the environment doesn't stay static over time. It changes. Shifts are due to two processes: colonization and local extinction. So a species can expand its range by colonizing an area where it doesn't exist. However, parts of its geographic range, in parts of its geographic range, the species may disappear because of a localized extinction caused by environmental change. Here's an example of a cosmopolitan species that you can see here in Kelowna and over a huge area of our planet, the painted lady butterfly. If you went to South Africa, in specific to a habitat known as the finbows, you would find the orange-breasted sunbird. It only occurs in this small little place. The mountain pine beetle is an example of a species whose geographic range is shifting, and it's shifting because of climate change. It is now occupying areas further north of its old distribution, and this is because climate change is warming these locations so that it can survive winter temperatures. The ecological niche is a really important concept in ecology and biogeography. The ecological niche can be defined as the total requirements of a species for all resources and physical conditions. It was first suggested by ecologist G.E. Hutchinson in 1958. His definition of niche suggested that it was an imaginary space with many dimensions. So here's a simple graphic describing two dimensions of the niche of a species. So let's pretend that there are only two variables that influence its distribution: moisture and temperature. And that circle represents the amounts of moisture and the levels of temperature that it best survives in. So population growth is high in the pink to red area, or positive. Outside that, population growth is negative. The species can't maintain itself. For a plant, niche might include the range of temperatures they can tolerate, the intensity of light required for photosynthesis, the specific humidity regimes it requires for things like germination, and the minimum quantities of essential soil nutrients it requires for uptake and growth. Now, there are two useful extensions to ecological niche: the fundamental niche and the realized niche. The fundamental niche of a species includes the total range of environmental conditions that are suitable for the existence without the influence of interspecific competition or predation from other species. So we're just including here the abiotic variables. Now, the realized niche describes the part of the fundamental niche actually occupied by the species. For example, rabbits can exist in North America, but at one time they didn't exist in Australia. They were introduced to that continent, and now they can live there. Prior to them living there, that was a fundamental niche. It had all the fundamental characteristics required for them to survive. And before they went to Australia, rabbits, their realized niche was just a smaller area of the world. So as illustrated in blue here. Now, we can group species according to the type of niche they have. So this concept is is somewhat related to the concept of endemic and cosmopolitan. Species that have a broad fundamental niche can survive in many different types of habitats under many different types of resource conditions are called generalists. Specialists are species that have a very specific resource requirement and a narrow fundamental niche. An example of that could be pandas. They require specific food types in order for them to survive. If they don't have those food types, they don't exist. Now, the nature of a species' fundamental niche can change because of competition and evolutionary forces. So a species changes over time because of changes in adaptations. Some of those adaptations may allow it to exist in a different fundamental niche. Here we see an example of a generalist. So the sparrow, it lives all over the place, doesn't really need any specific environmental conditions. And here we have a gorilla, which we might call a specialist, requires specific conditions for survival. However, if suddenly an adaptation caused wings to grow on the gorilla, it might be able to fly around and find other suitable tropical rainforests where it could survive. So this diagram illustrates how the niche of a species can change over time. For example, we have two species here, A and B. They overlap in terms of a resource gradient. Usually what happens over time is evolution will cause these two species to diverge. That in that area of overlap, species A and species B will lose certain adaptations that allow it to survive in those environments because they want to avoid competition between themselves and another species. So over time, species tend to diverge if there's niche overlap. This is what happened with the original ancestor of the finch, Darwin's finches, the finch that showed up on the Galapagos Island. It started changing in an evolutionary sense because populations were overlapping in terms of their niche, and through competition, divergence occurred. They developed different resource requirements, and this resulted from them gaining different adaptations for survival in the environment. Now, most organisms have the ability to move. Being able to move is important because it allows them to potentially expand their geographic range. The bigger your geographic range, the more likely you won't go extinct due to environmental change. Now, the actual process of moving, the term we use is dispersal. And so species disperse to find new environments. When they're able to find those environments and live in those environments, it's said that they've colonized. Dispersal can either be passive or active. So the organism may have the ability to move on its own with legs, wings, or it uses different aspects of the environment to move in a passive way. It may float in the wind, like the seed of an annual plant. It may be able to float on ocean currents and find new islands, like a coconut. So as I said, organisms want to disperse to find new habitats. New habitats are important because often being able to establish yourself there increases your ability to survive. Staying put is not the best thing. Often if you stay put, you have to compete with parents and siblings, and they have similar adaptations and characteristics to you. If you can go to a new environment and have the right adaptations to survive there, and there aren't other species with those adaptations, your ability to survive is quite high. So here we have an example of a species that passively moves with ocean currents, the coconut. So coconuts float, and they float around until they find another land surface where they can germinate on. So here we see a germinating coconut. Here is another example of a species with passive dispersal. This time it's using wind. So this is some type of annual plant. It's reached the end of its life, it's produced its seed, and now the seed is going to be picked up by wind and moved great distances. Now, as I said, dispersal, you know, it's important to find new vacant habitats. We can suggest that dispersal has an element of discovery to it. And as I said, finding new habitats increases the geographical range of species. A larger geographic range makes the species better off. In terms of evolution and survival, it's less likely to go extinct because of environmental change. Now, ideally, what you want to do if you're a dispersing individual is you want to colonize a site devoid of other organisms. Then you don't have to compete for the various abiotic requirements that you need for survival. Now, that may seem, well, how do species, survive? If it looks to me that habitats are always occupied by species. Well, that's not true. If you watch the environment for any time, you'll see that organisms disappear off the surface of the earth quite often due to disturbance, whether it's a fire or just the death of an organism, windstorms, flooding events. All of these things lead to disturbance. And a disturbance is a situation where the Earth's surface is cleared and open for colonization of species. But once you colonize, you're not really truly colonized until you can establish yourself as a species. And establishment means that you have the ability to grow and reproduce and produce new offspring to release into the environment. Here's an example of an environment that had an extreme disturbance. The eruption of Mount St. Helens volcano caused ash to fall, covered previous vegetation, and on that newly laid down sediments, new plants colonized and established themselves, like the Pacific lupin. And here we see another sad example of disturbance, fire. And fire kills both plants and animals, a very destructive disturbance type. And fire is increasing on our planet, according to climatologists, because of changes in temperature and precipitation are leading to more drying of vegetation, causing it to get alight much easier.